वहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
महादेव्यै च विद्महे विष्णुपत्न्यै च धीमहि तन्नो लक्ष्मी प्रचोदयात्. Today is the very auspicious occasion of Lakshmi Puja, celebrated probably in this part of the country more. When we go through the order of worshipping goddess in the Navaratri, you will find it in Swamiji's God Symbolism book also, that three days are allocated to three goddesses: Durga, Lakshmi, Saraswati. In Bengal, it is celebrated differently. Ma Durga visits the homeland, like that it is assumed. So, Avahan is done on Shashti. Saptami, Ashtami and Navami are the 3 days of dedicated worship, and 10th day you bid goodbye to the mother and she goes back. This is the tradition here. A week after that is the Paurnami today, which is the Lakshmi Puja. And then in January, as a culmination or end of all pujas, Basant Panchami, I think, that day comes the Saraswati Puja. But the order is the same. That is Durga, Lakshmi and Saraswati. Of course, in between there are various other pujas, even of goddess like Jagadatri Puja, like that. But generally this is the order, that Durga, Lakshmi and Saraswati are worshipped. So from the point of view of individual, Swamiji says, these 9 days need not be literally taken as the 9 days required for a person to get rid of his desires and achieve self-realization, but it is symbolic of how it happens. So Durga or Shakti is the destroyer of evil. So first and foremost thing is that we have to destroy the evil within us. This also, very interestingly, these three days also corresponds to karma, bhakti and jnana in a very, if you want to map it, you can do it. So you want to take away the negativities within your system, you want to make your mind purified, which is called as Chitta Shuddhi. Karma Yoga is the way. Hard Karma Yoga has to be done, and Durga helps us in that she is able to ward off all the evil tendencies in us. It is the hard ploughing of the field which is getting prepared to grow crops there. So maybe 3 days you can say at the body, mind and intellect level. This is a further mapping of that, that's all. So first and foremost thing is that only when you remove away all the negativities, then you can create some positive qualities or positive tendencies in you. This is gained by worshipping of Lakshmi. In fact, goddess Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth, but the real wealth is the wealth of these qualities. So compassion, forgiveness, perseverance, all these are very great traits which is required for the spiritual path, which makes it much more conducive to gain knowledge. So Mahalakshmi's worship is associated with this. Anything holy, anything auspicious, anything beautiful, anything bountiful is Mahalakshmi. So there is always a tendency to invoke her, and we see that when mostly people pertaining to running offices, businesses, they invoke Lord Ganesha as the Lord of success and Lord Mahalakshmi as the goddess of wealth, and that is a very important aspect of even their daily puja. Shops and offices, they do that as a daily puja. And then with such a prepared mind, it is elevated by gaining of knowledge. So Mahalakshmi's thing corresponds to bhakti, and gaining of knowledge, Saraswati puja corresponds to jnana yoga, knowledge of the self. So when the the ploughing is done on the rough field, it becomes conducive, and you water the field, it becomes soft. In that you can plant the crop and it will grow, plant the seed and it will grow. So in such a well prepared mind, you plant the knowledge of the self, it automatically blossoms. What is there comes forth, shining. So, Goddess Saraswati represents the pure knowledge that is there. For all the worldly knowledge also she is the goddess. For knowledge of self also she is the goddess. And we invoke Goddess Saraswati by removing all the desires through karma, bhakti and jnana. Last day, the Vijayadashmi day, is when the ego is annihilated. In North India they celebrated in a big way that Ravana's effigy is burnt. So the 10-headed monster called Ravana is indicative of your own ego with its 10 senses, 5 organs of perception and 5 organs of action. And you invoke the aggressive goodness of Rama within you to defeat Ravana. This is the symbolism which represents self-realization. So the 10 days of puja of Shakti culminating in Vijayadashami marks the victory of aggressive good over aggressive bad and opening up of the self within. Goddess Lakshmi as a goddess of wealth also indicates that the life of all the beings in this world has to be lived fully in prosperity and in abundance. So this is to be understood particularly since the advent of ideology like communism or socialism, which is maybe a century or a little more old, which is talking about very limited resources and there is a control over it and there is a glorification of poverty. See, this is not to say that you must not feel for the poor, you must in fact, but the way to do it and to make them get out of poverty is to be done in a very positive way. So I think this quote is attributed to, I don't know, Churchill or somebody. He says that there is only discussion in the West about socialism and capitalism. Okay. Is there any other method of even economy? They really do not know, and that is where we need to understand. India being a superpower for many centuries together, we did not follow either capitalism or socialism. What is it that we followed? There is a study about that should be undertaken. So he says about capitalism and socialism that in capitalism wealth is unequally distributed. In socialism, poverty is equally distributed. So this is a fair enough representation, I would say, because if you cannot raise, if I cannot raise myself to your level, I'll pull down to your level. And there is actually, in that case, there is no motivation or inspiration for anybody to even work, produce or anything. A teacher demonstrated this in this class by, after all the test is over, he took the average of all the marks that he got and distributed among all the students. So from next time onwards, the person who was studying more and aiming to get more marks, there was no inspiration for him. So it is said, I do not know how far it is true, even in China, outwardly it is like a communist state, but they had opened up their market and economy in the late 70s itself. That is what the economists say. So they wanted to inculcate this idea into the people, and what they got as a response was eye-opening for them. So he said, everybody has to plant, given an acre of land or something like that, you have to plant trees, and the fruit of the trees will be common for all. Nobody took that much initiative, go plant trees or water it or fence it and take care of it, because isme mera kya hai? What is there for me that didn't work. Then they modified the rule and said, you plant tree, that effective fruit will come to your children or grandchildren, like that they said. Slight improvement, but that also didn't work. Then they understood, what you plant, you will get what you will sow, that you will reap. Then there was a rush because there is a motivation. This is how generally the running is there. There is nothing adharmic about it. Yes, you can call it selfish, but that's how it works. Okay. Now, what is the human tendency, how it works according to certain laws of nature? Based on that, only government has to formulate laws. You cannot have ideology based on your own whims and fancies and impose that law upon a group of people. It will not work. Even in Russia, they tried to say that there's no God and there's no worship, and it went on for years together as USSR. But people were internally having that, and then once it all broke, all the old forms of church and worship and everything came up. So what is natural for a person to do, you have to understand and go according to that. In case of socialism, they also talk about an episode in Russia. They say that in order to, in the very initial days when they wanted to implement this and they wanted to make people understand, and to encourage them into this socialistic way of living. So the government officials went to a peasant and they asked him, suppose if you have 10 acres of land and you need only 4 acres, will you not give 6 acres for others who need it? He said, yes, obviously I'll give, definitely. That's how it should be. Then they said, if you have 10,000 rubles, their currency, and you need only for yourself 2,000 rubles, will you not distribute that 8,000? Obviously, definitely I'll give. Then they said, if you have 4 goats, and it's enough that you have 2 goats, will you not distribute the 2 goats away? He said, no, I will not do that. Why? Because I actually have 4 goats. I actually have four goats only. I will not do that. See, why he was giving the land away? I don't have any land. It's okay. If you want, you take it, like that. He said, I don't have so many rubles, but I actually have 4 goats. I will not part with it. Now, see, in the article, Swami Ramatirtha argues, because in his time only this ideas of communism, socialism, all this ism was coming up. He has also written articles about evils of capitalism, which we don't find in his books, because I do not know why people after his samadhi decided with lawyers and others' advice not to publish, since it may cause something controversial or something that he has written. But he has written about the evils of capitalism also. But he says about socialism, he says Vedanta is real socialism. Socialism says that you must not have possessions. Every possession is government's possession. They will decide how much each person needs, what it needs, like that, etc. And it seems to be outwardly a very rosy and a fair picture, which is equal for all, but it doesn't work that way. But so socialism essentially says that the individual should not have possessions. He says Vedanta says, with a slight change in the tone, it says there must not be possessiveness. That's all. If everybody does not have possessiveness and try to practice that trait, how will it really matter if you have more money or less money? As long as you are having the detached view of this is not mine, that is obviously. So you will find that in old India also there were rich and poor, but one of the tests of a rich country, a superpower or an advanced or a developed country, is that the food that the poorest person eats and the food that the richest person eats, which is meant for survival, is more or less same. They may have additional items, like ghee is considered, suppose a rich man's food. He will have ghee, and he will have ghee for probably every meal. A poor man will not have ghee, but he will also have whatever rice chawal. That person also has that basic. This is an indication, because your bottom line or the common denominator is there enough money for you to eat and survive? That is there, and there is a place to survive. That's about all. So that is a sort of a developed nation, and that is how India was. So Swami Ramatirtha says socialism will not work because it is directly attacking the possessions of the person. But Vedanta is real socialism, where it says irrespective of what you have or don't have, you don't have a possessive attitude. King Janaka and therefore Kuchela or Sudama are one and the same in terms of their renunciation. He was a king or emperor of the whole country. Sudama was a pauper, friend of Krishna. That's about all. But they were extremely detached with reference to wealth, and that is shown in Sudama's life, that after he gets wealth also he continues to be in the same way of life. No change. External situations will change, he will not change. This is how it says. So, coming back here, always there is worshipping of abundance. There's no such thing as one of the ways. In fact, Swamiji said it in passing when he was explaining yajna, that every year at the end of the harvest and everything, you perform big yajnas and finally you make everything, offer it to God and consume all the grain. Oh, what will happen for next year? Don't worry. Next year there will be a lot of production. Like that it is. There is always abundance. There is always, bounty. I was recently reading an article, very interesting. One of the greatest kings of all times, if not the greatest, was Krishna Devaraya, of whom there is only maybe a paragraph or two that we study in the historical books, because it's mostly dealing with Mughal rule and other things. Krishna Devaraya, and when he was ruling, Hampi was the Vijayanagara Empire. Vijayanagara Empire was the richest kingdom in the world. Hampi was the richest city in the world. Now what it is known as the ruins of Hampi. It is very sad plight how it is there, not even properly taken care by the government. If such a thing is there in any other country, it would have been in a very great shape, but that's how it is. So in Krishna Devaraya's rule, there was military might, there was abundance of knowledge. He himself was very fluent in Kannada, Telugu. He wrote poetry in Kannada about the Tamil saint Andal, Amukta Malayada. He was also encouraging poets, scholars of Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, even from Bengal, it is said. So there was enough patronage for all forms of knowledge and arts. So there is this richness, bounty, military might, knowledge. Durga, Lakshmi, Saraswati, all were blessing him. And then obviously sculpture and dance and various other forms also reached Telugu poetry and all reached its zenith in his rule only. Like that it is. Peak. So it is said there were the people in his kingdom would eat very substantial food. The variety which they cooked and eat, that itself is recorded in a very big treatise. Now we may think, what will it not create indigestion? No, we have forgotten in fact how to eat. Our digestion has shrunk actually. It is you exercise well, you eat well, you work well, you are happy without worrying about sugar and pressure and hypertension and other things. You will eat well. And it is not that they were indiscriminately eating on something. Everything would have been healthy also. I am just saying. Not only that, after eating what type of pan they ate, there is a big treatise on pan. Tambula Manjari is a text on preparation and consumption of betel leaves, pan. It's interesting. What all ornaments they wore and how fashionable they were. If you go to various temples in Karnataka, you will find these sculptures depicting that. Halabedu and Hampi I have not gone, but surely there. And Belur is one place there. So these are places which clearly depict that the fashion. Everybody grew a lot of flowers. They had a strong sense of fragrance. They would prepare beds with flowers. Even walking, wherever it is required, like carpet they will have. And on hair, different decorations, different colors and different each seasonal, like that they used to have. Now this may seem outwardly very indulgent. This is not so. Actually, if everything has that bottom line of connecting to that spirituality, everything is okay. You will find that how Krishna lived in luxury in Dwaraka and how he played when he was in Vrindavan and even with his wives later, and then even play games like what do you call that? Huh.
Chopper.
That is snakes and ladders and going to that gambling type of thing also, everything. There was enough time and energy for all types of recreation. We don't have time to eat actually. There is and we feel that we will be wasting time in eating. See, each and everything is part and parcel of our spirituality that we don't consider. Sports. It is to other extreme. In Roman Empire, when it was at its peak, nearly 2/3 of the year they only spent in seeing the sports. Like that it was. I do not know if it is right or wrong, but that is how it was. And that sports were some gruesome sports were also there, playing with slaves and other thing, making them fight with each other till one killed the other. But they were encouraging all those things. They were encouraging like that. So each and everything, and the temples they built, kavyas they wrote, each and everything is in a magnificence. Nothing of very short and small structure. Nothing. It is all in very huge. See, it's interesting. In Delhi, recently, or no, not recently, in 1930s when Mahatma Gandhi was there, was I think the first Birla Mandir was constructed. There was a huge fanfare about it because for very many centuries after the rule of sultans and other thing, after destruction of various temples, big temple was not there at all. So this came up and it was this is how it used to be. Everywhere it used to be. North there was a spate of attacks. North, Bihar, Bengal, everywhere there was a spate of attacks by the Islamic rulers, and so it had to come. Relatively, it was little protected in the south. The ruins of Hampi is only because the Sultan, after Krishnadevaraya's rule, after 30-40 years, some other king, and when he was defeated, they took as a vengeance to destroy all these sculptures, and the richest kingdom came to ruins. But down south also, when people were persecuted from Karnataka and Andhra, when they came to Tamil Nadu, they were actually the protectors, and that is why Tamil Nadu is still blessed with such big temples everywhere. Now, you will find that in north and everywhere, otherwise in other parts of the world also, when Islamic and other rulers in Mesopotamia, in various Europe, kings, when they achieved something, they used to have a big statue of themselves. And they might have various other maybe tombs, memorials, big portraits, all these things that I achieved this. Okay. You find that great kings like Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, they were all there, but hardly we know about them. The big temple in Tanjavur is a great testimony to the greatness of the king who built it, and Rajendra Chola, who conquered up to Indonesia and Java and he built a equivalent temple in another place nearby. But we don't have even a statue named, or it is not known at all. And in the last days of his life, he withdrew himself to a small village near the forest where he was practicing Vedanta. That is what their life was. Their life was, in the normal course, it goes into the peak and comes and plateaus and goes. So each and everything is a part and parcel of their spirituality. But all of them encouraged abundance. All of them encouraged prosperity. And their techniques, and that is why science and technology, that was in their advance. Yesterday, everybody would have seen Modi going to Mahabalipuram. Very many monuments in the sea coast is subject to so much of corrosion because of the breeze that blows near the sea. But it has withstood all these things, means that they have so much advancement in the technology. One of the famous Lord Kartikeya temples is in Tiruchendur, which is next to the beach, and it has withstood all tsunamis, it has withstood all the invasions and everything, and it stands like that. So whatever abundance they had, they did not portray on themselves or projected themselves with that, they projected God with that. That is how it is. Each and every king followed this. And They were simplistic in their mind, but very grand in their vision. Very, very grand in their vision. This has to be remembered, and this is what Mahalakshmi is all about. So, we respect wealth. Mahalakshmi is goddess who is always with Mahavishnu. You cannot divorce Lakshmi and Vishnu. You try to do that, only maybe for a while she will be there, she will go away. Ravana did that and he suffered because of that. Hanuman is eternally there because he worships Rama and Sita together. They are both in his heart. They cannot be separated. So even symbolically, Mahavishnu represents the higher values and Lakshmi is always at his feet. You will see the picture that she is massaging him. So wherever Vishnu is there, Lakshmi says, I am definitely there. So the story of all the civilizations, Swami Ramtirtha says, also shows that wherever people have pursued higher values, automatically there is wealth. To the extent that you are able to do that, to that extent it comes. But where people worship poverty, poverty will only be there. And it is very many wealthy countries. Now Venezuela we are seeing in South America, very rich country, a great oil producing country, going down the drain. They are not even having milk to feed their children. They are asked to kill stray animals and eat like that, and all it has come. How did it come to such an extent? Argentina was another example like that. Or even after invasion and British and everything, when India was had woken up in 1947, we were much ahead of various other countries, at least in Asia, but we also went backwards because of this policy only. So you can never glorify poverty. You can never glorify anything negative for that matter. You will find that you take randomly any national award winning movie, you cannot sit through it. Actually, you cannot sit through those movies. When we had only 1 or 2 channels, they used to have in Sunday some award movie, different languages they put. But storyline are more or less same for all movies. Particularly this Bengali and Malayalam. These 2 movies which used to win lot of awards. You cannot really watch it, and that was glorified. Suppose if any happy and big movie which was successful, they will not be even allowed to celebrate. They say it is not showing reality. This is what reality means. You have to always be in poverty and show it again and again and again. Like that it is. So, through movies, through everything, this was promoted. So, our mindset became like this. So, when man's energy is there just fighting for survival, stand in a queue for kerosene oil or stand for gas connection you have to book now, 5 years later it will come. Or when the child is born itself they are booking a telephone connection, Bajaj scooter, each and everything. If it is like that, that's why some people, when they fought against this and became successful in India, it is a great achievement. If in a country like America or even Canada, where systems are very good and it's best, you have to put in effort and you will get the result. Anybody can do business there. It is sad that a good amount of brains are gone there because it was not allowed to blossom here. And imagine now, all the brains is used for the main, the support of their capital and their industries and other things like that. So, we could have achieved very, very many things. So, there is no dearth of, so first we have to understand, world operates, yes, see the water comes as rain, goes to the ocean, comes up, there's a cycle. There's a cycle everywhere. That cycle will be there. But there is enough and more for everybody and anybody. Their abundance and infinity is the bounty of the nature. You go to forest, it doesn't say, I'll give you 100 fruits. You try to, the percentage of fresh water may be very less, but that percentage is more than enough to sustain all the animals, birds, insects, reptiles and man also. So it is unimaginable how the nature presents itself in bounty. Each and everything is, so much abundant. We have to learn this from nature. So what should we be worried about at all? Okay, however man can be selfish and he wants to aggrandize for himself, he stands no chance against the nature. Like that it is. But our ideology or thinking must not be confined in a small way. See, take even film music for example. Take Shastriya Sangeet or Carnatic music, Hindustani music or any film music for that matter. Swaras are only 7. So it seems that within the swaras you have to make. So there is only limited chance. This is what it appears to be. But is that the case? Songs and tunes and these things have been coming for centuries together. New music directors, they come, they rule for a particular age, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, they produce a different kind of music. Another person comes, completely different type of music. And now, if you don't have enough thing, you take the old ones and you recycle. But if there is enough scope for your minds to flow freely, there will be new things that will be coming. New songs will be coming, new literature will be coming, each and everything, because the source which is Atma is infinite. When the source of Atma is infinite, the expression of that has to be infinite. That has to be infinite. That's all. So through your limited mind and intellect, however much it will come. And how many more minds will be there? There will be enough more minds. Advancement of science and technology. At some point of time, they thought physics has reached its end. Astronomy has reached its end. It is not so. There is always scope for furtherance. So this is what we need to promote. So if anybody has gained success, we should actually celebrate. You may not be correct. See, be it, I am not talking particularly anything directly about what Sri Ravi Shankar ji is, Sadhguru ji is, or anybody is. And we may have even difference of opinion as to the approach or method or even the stuff that they talk about. That's a different matter. But if Baba Ramdev has achieved success, why should it bother anybody that he is doing? This is not a Swami's job. No, all those things you don't see. It is whether he is doing directly, indirectly, whatever he is doing. There is, why not you celebrate the success? So once you start celebrating success, that is the success that is going to come to you also. You have to revel in success. A person who says not possible, failure, it's not achievable, he is going to again and again, failure is going to visit him. Hinduism's way of life is only celebration. Whether it is India winning cricket match is also celebration. Any festival also celebration. Each and everything, even death is celebration. Disease also sometimes you celebrate like a goddess has arrived. Like that it is. So there is no one test is that there are very many great socialist, communist and sort of dictatorial leaders that in the last century world has produced in various countries. Some are even taken as heroes outside their country and they celebrate, they keep statue and other thing. But try to find out any statue or any photo in which they are smiling. It is not possible. Mostly it is not possible. I am subject to correction if I really find, but I am just saying happiness will not be there in their face. It has to go along with this law of nature, the Sanatana Dharma. Life must be celebrated. No restriction, you cannot do this, you have to dress like this, you have to be confined like this. This is not the way. This is not how it should be. So, Mahalakshmi's worship must be in this way. That you always celebrate abundance. Always celebrate everybody's success. In the dharmic way. Not that celebrate means somebody has, flown a aeroplane in Twin Towers and there are some people who celebrate. That is not success. I mean, in a dharmic way, somebody has risen up the ladder. Or even if one of your relatives got a lottery. I mean, what is the big deal? I mean, you have to be happy for him. That's about all. So Mahalakshmi's worship, I am saying, must be understood this way. That because when you are internally in a happy mood based on that, and since you have discarded the negativities within you, it will only automatically now push you towards gaining more and more success in spirituality also. You should never be content actually. Contentment is a great virtue as far as material wealth is concerned. But let's say if a statue of unity was built, that's not my property or your property, it's a collective thing of the country, but it's a great achievement. So you should celebrate it. Great leaders don't need great statues. These are all people who want to bring down the value of it. So you may be content at your level. That's a great virtue, because if there is greed and lack of contentment, it will make our mind more depressed. You be content at your level with whatever God has provided you. But as far as spirituality is concerned, never be content. Never be content. You have to aim for the highest till that point. So I would say, even positively, if you are jealous about great achievers in spirituality, it's okay. You say that I want to become like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, I want to become like Ram Tirtha or Ramana Maharshi or Mirabai or Andal or whoever is your inspiration, keep like that. Then there is a aspiration. Swami Chinmayananda says, keep your goal so high that you must not be able to achieve it. You want to go higher and higher. So there is never a satisfaction that yes, I have achieved. Swami Ramtirtha puts it differently. He says, your motto in life to strive, to struggle, not to succeed. Not to succeed. Not to succeed does not mean courting failure, but to be in the striving, to be in the struggle, always be in the struggle, wanting to achieve, wanting to go higher and higher. When success comes, enjoy it for a while, and then again you have to start the journey, moving up. So there is no letting go of the efforts. Very beautifully put. So on this auspicious day, we invoke the grace of Mahalakshmi to bestow us with abundance and plenty in all respects of life, for all of us. Right.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Would it be correct to say that at the time of independence, the nation was in a complete tamas? It was left leaderless in that sense that it was there was earlier there was a system which was pushing it to do something. After all the 200 years of this thing of colonization, basically we had stopped thinking for ourselves.
Basically, at the time of independence, I would say it was not definitely tamas. There was a lot of sattva, and the awakening was there, started about a century back. With a lot of, you will find lot of thinkers, and all based on the Sanatana Dharma. Whether it was Paramahamsa or in all corners of the country, there were revolutionaries, there were very forward thinking people, and also scientists and mathematicians, Ramanujam and
Even
various.
Mahatma Gandhi
Was basically inspired by Sanatana Dharma. So there was a lot of sattva only. But post independence, maybe we can say we slipped into tamas. And this opening up of the economy and other thing infused sort of a rajas into. So we can say post 91 there was a lot of activity. And not only that, you will find that therefore more selfishness, then more corruption and other things was there. See, suppose if there was no money to first of all do corruption, there will be not much corruption. But still the seeds of corruption were there. That seeds of corruption very well manifest later. So all this is part of rajas and tamas only. But now we are in I would say, a good transitional phase. There is a lot more to be achieved. One person put it in this way, in terms of resources and the gunas that we talk about, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra as a concept also, if you take workforce and labor and doing that, it's always there and it has been rising. We have also now seen a lot of money, our GDP is improving this, so the capitalism, the Vaishya aspect of the nation is also progressing. We have to fully now take charge of the Kshatriya aspect, which is military, and that is also defense expenditure, everything is increasing. There is also, we have to now focus on knowledge aspect, the Brahman aspect, and that is the key. Future is only knowledge based, and we have all the right ingredients. Okay, we have to take control of it, we have to take charge of the narrative of it, we have to take the initiative of innovation of it, and that is a big process, big procedure, but that is where we need to start. So we are now in a transitional phase, we can say, towards right direction. A future of good knowledge society can be built based on a strong foundation of the past. Okay, so we need to understand, not just to prove that my grandfather was great and he was greater than your grandfather, not to prove that, but how and what he used as a knowledge, can we use it as the same knowledge base to grow further? How See, we see a lot of innovations in China, Japan, and everything, how they have advanced in science and technology, but how their native language has helped them in do that, all those things. So now, all these things we need to discuss and propagate a proper policy. So if you look at from the present government point of view also, various things that have been done correct, and we have to put a tick mark there, foreign policy or defense and various other things, but knowledge, education, and the proper framing of the rules of constitution, those things are untouched. And when this is what it is, when the collective thought force of the individual is seeking or demanding that will happen. So when we say that, how did India awaken in the 19th century and up to half of 20th century, is there's a collective demand from the people towards that. See, Bengal produced so many stalwarts, and you will find that the general attitude of the people here are also inquisitive, inquiring, learning, and wanting that. So you are presented with a supply where there is a demand like that. Okay, there were a lot of great poets who came up in Europe more or less in the same time, Renaissance and post-Renaissance period. Wordsworth and Shakespeare and various great poets and scientists in England, France, and that area, Italy, because there was a lot of awakening there happened at that point of time after a long sleep, long term of ignorance there. Similarly, America, like that you will find that everywhere, Japan. This is according to the law of demand and supply. So if we are able to change our thought process and thought focus towards that, that is going to happen. One thing is, there is enough resources even in this country, and Bharat Mata will keep on producing that also. We need to be intelligent to use it further. And for the sake of, I would say, not just India, for the sake of whole world, this knowledge has to be retained, propagated, and spread also. We failed probably in spreading it properly, then that is what created other religions to come and spread here, and which is not of much use. It has only contributed negatively that way. Yes, sir.
We've been hearing repeatedly the saying that we should not be possessive about our own possessions. Very easily said. But then, for example, if we take a house property, bank balance, whatever, shares, this thing, that thing, what the individual possesses, what is meant by saying that you should not be possessive about those things? Because even today, the father, if he has got a house, he will keep it in his own name till the last breath. Then the sons will be fighting after him. I mean, are there any ground rules for slowly getting out of this possessiveness spirit and going into a non-possessive?
Yeah, in fact, even those who write the will, they are advised to write that after my passing away, it will go to the wife, or there further it will go to sons or daughter, whatever. He has that now, because of insecurity or let us say you are not sure as to the values that the sons will practice. Suppose King Lear is a very great play by Shakespeare which shows this. What King Lear is a king of England. On his 80th birthday, he divides the kingdom into three. He has three daughters. The first two daughters are actually vicious daughters, Goneril and Regan. They are married. Third daughter, that day only, 80th birthday, he has called two suitors to for engaging her in marriage, and she is a most virtuous daughter. She is the most likable, nice girl. She is. So on the 80th day, he spreads out the map of England and divides into three, and then he asks the first daughter, "What do you have to say?" She gives a poetry praising his father, this, that. Even though I'm married, I'm loyal to you, only like that and all. She says, he's so flattered, so flattered. He says, "This is your share." And then the second daughter, Regan, she also great poetry, she says, and he's so flattered. And the third daughter is fuming because she knows the intention of both her sisters. She is very angry about that, but she's not showing that. Now the father asks, he likes her also. He asks, "What do you have to say?" She says, "Nothing." Because I don't want to say anything. That's what she meant. I have nothing to say. He gets upset. Then he says, do you know that nothing comes out of nothing? That means you will not get anything. That's what he says. It doesn't matter, she says. One of the suitors who came backs off immediately because he had come for the share only. Other one was a virtuous king from France. A prince had come and he takes her as it is and he goes. Now, once the property is divided between these two now, full property, third one has no share. The king is made like a beggar in his own country. He stays with this daughter for some time, that daughter for some time, then they both leave him on the streets begging in England where he was the king. So Shakespeare shows what it will happen, how maybe this is the advent of Kali, you can say. In Kali Yuga, this is what will happen. The sons who are supposed to take care and all, they are not taking care. Like that it is. Now, to be practical and smart enough in doing, even those who say that, I don't want to write will and all. Swamiji says, no, first when you are sane, do it properly. So that you at least be charitable after your death. There is no this thing. Any other problem, sort it out now only and do it. If you are going to make, they will curse you after death. Why you didn't do that? Why do you want that? Okay, so it is again looking at from others' point of view, and from your own point of view, you want peace of mind. You don't want to get into all this tension and worry, leaving it for the last moment and all those things. So that way it is very practical to do it too. And even we talked about Mahalakshmi, we say that as a Grahastha and when you are there is a requirement of wealth for a person to sustain himself in the world. Thiruvalluvar says in Thirukural that Porul illar ki ulagam illai. That means a person who doesn't have wealth is not adhikari for this world. Or no, doesn't have grace, he is not adhikari for that world, he says. That world is the spiritual world. That is whatever, self-realization. You are not capable of that if you don't have grace of God. So, you need to work for wealth. And therefore, it is a duty of a grahastha or a householder to earn wealth. A brahmachari's duty is to study, make himself prepared to enter the life. Once you enter life, you have to earn wealth. Okay. When you earn wealth, grahastha means who is rooted. He is rooted in house. Okay. It means as though he is fixated. He will move here and there, but he is called as he is fixated in household. Such a person who is fixated in household has to take care of various things. That is his dharma. When he does dharma like that properly only, that is why very interesting. Since we are in the subject, I'll say, people are asking, because beyond a point, money takes over your life. Money is required, but how much to earn and how much to keep, we really do not know how to calculate. What does money do to a person in his life? What money does is that money sets in an acceleration in your life. See, suppose imagine a person who is not doing anything, lazily sleeping. So you tell him that come to Calcutta, I'll get you a job, and then you can be on your own. You can. So what happens is he now sees some money. Then what happens? He can buy a house. He can do this. He can buy a vehicle. Desires get excited. So what happens is that there is a force in his thinking. I want to do this. I want to achieve this. I want to aim for this. So there is acquisition tendency that comes in. So he becomes more fast-paced in life. He doesn't have time for anything else. Maybe a relationship and this and that all takes a backseat now. This is the primary focus. And the more you pedal, more you supply the gas, the more the car goes faster and faster. So when it reaches very peak speed, that is susceptible to get into accident. So as you gain money, you must gain control also. This is what it says. So therefore, firstly to say that you get your house and stand on your own legs is fine. But then we do not know how to draw the line or how to have a control over it. So a formula is given. If somebody says, suppose if I say, keep as much as money as only you need, not more than that. You will say that is correct. But where to draw the line for need, I do not know. I thought a car is a need for me at one point of time, but now Mercedes-Benz latest when it comes, it seems to be like a need for me. It is not a luxury or anything, because you do not know I am in my society. See, it is very interesting psychology or a case study. The ex-minister who was arrested, P. Chidambaram, he belongs to a wealthy family in Tamil Nadu. He belongs to that sort of a traditionally wealthy family. And even when he was in his peak during 90s, 2000s and all, before even being the minister, he was first the finance minister in 96 government, third front when it formed the thing. So he was well versed in politics, he is well versed in economy, he is well versed in law. He used to charge about 5 lakhs for half an hour appearance in the Supreme Court even in late 90s. Like that was his caliber. Even if he had no background of wealth or anything from his family and parampara point of view, his wife who was a lawyer have enough amassed wealth. But then you see that there's a lot of greed, and there are so many illegal activities that are attributed to his way of functioning, and that's why he was caught, and various things are there. The question will ask, why did such a person do this? It is said that when he compared himself in his cousins and his society or something, he was a poor person. That is what has been his thought. So therefore, to grow over them and to amass wealth and other thing has been running in a system for very long, and that becomes an acceleration. Once it crosses that boundary, one breaks the glass and cuts his fingers, says the poem Pineapple and the Bee. With hopeless wish one looks and lingers, tamas. One breaks the glass and cuts his fingers, rajas. Rajas takes over. Rajas means force, passion, that will take over. So we really do not know. And he will say, no, 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs per day is a need. In my society, that's the need. In my level, that is a need. When somebody says it's a need, you cannot say anything against it. 3 lakhs, 5 lakhs, whatever it is per day, if it is a need, then what can you say to such a person? So, how do we calculate? It is said, first of all, when you are somewhat settled, you will know that what is your normal monthly household running expenses. That's the first thing. Your provisions, school fees, electricity, water, bill, milk, all these things, food, rent if you, whatever it is, all these are essential things. You know how much is required for a month. Put it down. Maybe add 5-10%, whatever, if you have missed anything, put it down. Second is, you have to provide for those who are dependent on you. It could be your driver, it could be your servant. When you are working in company, you have to by law give that provident fund, this superannuation and all the things. But what do you do for somebody who is working in unorganized sector like your domestic help or a driver? But you have to. So if any requirement in his house is children's education or something, all those things you do. Happily you do, and this is not a charity. This you are obliged to do. They are working for you and you are supposed to do it for them. Basic things that is required for them, you have to do. When a situation arises like a function or something, you help in that time. Third is, you have to provide for emergency. Emergency, mostly with intellect you will calculate, foresee everything, but still it is not possible. Mostly emergency pertains to health issues. You do not know when and how, what will happen. Any hospital bill can go, anything. So whatever insurance and mediclaim and this and that, provide a good sum for that. Calculate. All these things you must do while making yourself trying to be healthy. It's not that. Then what will happen is, I do not know. Nowadays, once you visit hospital, 5 lakhs. Then I do not know how much you then earn for 5. What will happen is, you are inviting disease to you to that extent. A big disease will come. So because you have really worked towards that. So it is just an intellectual calculation and a provision. That's all. So emergency you do for your house insurance, this insurance, all those things. Fourth is, set aside one part of savings so that beyond a point where you are not going to run like a chicken without head from morning to evening, just only earning money and taking care of the family, interest from that savings will take care of your basic needs, so that you are ready to pursue whatever you want to pursue. Person wants to pursue Sangeet or visit temples or do various things, that is real passion or this thing Swadharma is, but he has been involved in a day's activity where he is selling all his time to earn money. This is not the right approach. Therefore, what you do, set aside some savings, reasonable savings, which is a good habit which we see in Eastern economy, particularly India and Japan, China and all. They do save a lot. That is a tendency. Okay, good tendency. Fifth is very important. Whatever you earn, some amount has to be set aside for charity. Charity is something which you give for a social cause where you don't seek any favor in return. It is for purely the benefit of others. Why? You have to do. Even a person who earns 500 rupees a month, he has to do 5 rupees. Let's say, I'm just saying, it could be 10%, it could be 1. In other religions, this is given as a percentage. So for them it's easy and they feel it is over. Hinduism doesn't say like that. It gives for you to think and do, and you have to be charitable all the time. Always. It is not that I have given 10% of my income and that's it, my charity is over. You have to be charitable in your disposition all the time, in not just in money, in all points of view. But money, of course, is the minimum thing that you must do for people who are dedicated themselves to higher cause, for beggars, for whatever, orphanage or old age or whatever is the social requirement that is there. Whatever you can do, you must give as charity, and this you must inculcate in children also. If you calculate like this, suppose you have a serious calculation and you say, when you are 20, I am going to have 5 crores. Till that time, don't disturb me for anything. It doesn't work like that. You will grow, your income will increase, you will have promotions. So therefore, have that as a benchmark and you have this thing. After that, don't be too much bothered about money. That is how it should be. Meaning, you must have higher things to worry about. You must not worry about money. You make enough provision like that for that and be content with that, and do not come. All the problem comes because of comparison. How much he has got or how much he has withheld or what is the equation like that. So you have to then be very happy within your means and your plan of life. That is very important. So coming back to this question again. So when you do all these things, normal possession in that is okay. But when it turns into possessiveness, then there will be not a very easy opening up of hands even for your children. So Bhajagovindam says that practically, Putradapi dhana bhajam bhitihi sarvatresha vihitariti. A wealthy man then becomes afraid of his son. See, suppose if a person has enough for him to spare, to generally take care of himself, with his excess, if his son wants to do some business and he asks for a capital, will he give or not? Or what is the basis on which he should give? It should be based on the process of what is the Swadharma of the son, what is the capability of the son, and give him all the advice and other things. And that must be the criterion of discussion. Then why not? If you have money, why not help him with that? So this is where, when the possessiveness is there, it will not easily come. That's what I mean. So you have to, what Vedanta talks about is this attitude of possessiveness, which is going to be a hindrance in your own thinking, in your own. So I would say then, gather how to get rid of this. Gather higher level of possessiveness. Instead of my money, my house, take care of my community, my company. So all the company people should have proper house. All that becomes my house then, right? That is a possessiveness. My co-religionists, my Marwari community, or my Tamil community, or my Bengali community, like that. You take that so make that my bigger my. Then you will find that your smaller hold loosens. Little bit it releases the grip. That's how it should be.
First chapter VT.
So you have to loosen that grip of a concentrated possessiveness by taking up. So who is a sannyasi who has taken up the possession of the whole world? He is called Maharaj. He is really the Maharaj of the world. He doesn't have any one particular family. He will not be bothered by one particular. Everybody's joy is his joy, everybody's sorrow is sorrow. Like that, you have to go. Oh, permission.
Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate.